Welcome you all back to ThinkTech Hawaii's Human Humane Architecture. In our times of a COVID pandemic, most of us being locked down all over the world in one way or another. So us here thinking about the built environment have been thinking about what if we would be in nice, easy breezy outdoor spaces that yet provide us with the privacy we would need. And that got us to the very archaic typology of courtyards. And this is volume 7 of a total of volume 8 series about courtyards. So we've been asking around in DeSoto and I, thinking about talking to others who have memories and experiences in that area. And today this is getting us back to our inaugural guest of our Human Humane Architecture show, who is our Tropic Here educator and prototyper, Professor David Rockwood. Good to have you back on the show, David.
Oh, thank you very much, Martin. Great to be here. Appreciate the invitation.
Good, and let's jump right in and get the first slide up, because at the top right, you can see a reference on the first slide at the up there, which was the show we did with you, in which we introduced you as the Tropic Here. And so, you know, we made this name up, and it's basically like engineering and making, you know, tropical environments. And you've been sharing your passion and I can say obsession with its exotic and erotic tropical nature. And so when I asked you about courtyards, the projects we want to jump in now and you guys are seeing now is the first thing that came to your mind, because it's a project that you imagined for your second home, because you're a Haole guy as I am, and we're not from here, but this is what you imagined for your adopted home in Hawaii. And please, let's share with us a little bit what the project is about and what we see, David.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this is a project I designed for the Sun Tra Peninsula in Da Nang, Vietnam. And Vietnam, as many of you probably know, has a climate which is fairly similar to Hawaii, but it gets a little colder in the winter and a little hotter in the summer. But for all intents and purposes, it's quite similar, so we can kind of think about it in that way. And the Sun Tra Peninsula is very beautiful. It's a sort of series of mountains which rise directly out of the ocean. So this was kind of on a hillside. One side has a retaining wall, which you can see in the rendering in the lower left, which forms the kind of main courtyard in front of the house proper. But this actually has a number of courtyards. One is an entry court, and then there's a kind of courtyard which is actually a koi pond between the house and the studio or office space. So in the rendering, you can see there's a lap pool, and then there's a long linear kind of koi pond which runs sort of in front of the house and the studio as well. This is a night view, so the house is all closed up at this point, but we'll see views that show it opened up.
Well, and for that reason, let's bring up the second slide, because there we see it open up, right?
Right. Yeah. So there are all the screens are slid back, and these are all wood louvered screens, so you can adjust the wind and sun and so forth. And this house actually uses what's called a hyperbolic paraboloid concrete umbrella. So it's a kind of shell form which is quite efficient. So it allows the minimized structure so that you can then open this up to the maximum extent possible around the edges of the house. So there you can see the kind of sea on the left and then the courtyard on the right.
Okay, let's bring up the next slide, which shows you the sort of intermediate courtyard water feature, right?
Yeah, so this view is taken from the studio and then you can see the courtyard slash koi pond in the middle, and then the house proper in the background. And then sort of off into the right, you can see the courtyard that has the lap pool. There's actually an entry court, and you can see a screen which is sort of pulled forward in this view, kind of off to the right.
Yeah, and you know, while this is a beautiful house, some of the many things we share that we're sort of increasingly concerned about, an increasing number of people who are falling through the cracks of well-being and enjoying, especially areas like Vietnam and Hawaii, which are paradises, at least climatically, but they're getting more and more gentrified, and so they're getting less and less paradise for too many people. So we've been interested for a while in the proletarian, I guess, interpretation of dwelling, and also of courtyards. And for that reason, bring up the next slide and explain to us. And it also features at the top right a reference to the second show we did with you, as here being an educator in Vietnam, so your second or your third home and your second paradise, where you've also been highly dwelling on screens as another very tropical device. So explain to us what this project here is about, David.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so yeah, certainly the last project we saw was sort of upscale, but I definitely share interest with Martin on doing something on a more modest scale and that can be accessible to more people. So this is an urban kind of row house type, which is the prevalent house type in Vietnam. This is also for Da Nang. And in this project, I wanted to introduce a courtyard into it, which is along the lines of traditional houses in Vietnam, urban houses. Often they would run very deep with a narrow street frontage. And because of that, they need to get light and ventilation. So they would have often in those houses even multiple courtyards. This is not as deep, and there was only space for one. So you can see that in the image on the upper left. This is a strange sort of architect's type of drawing. But what it is it's showing a kind of outer house that's in the bottom part. And then the sort of house itself, a kind of inner house, is pulled up just so you can see those separate elements.
Mm-hmm. And moving on to the next slide, as you already said, you have also an interest in the urban, believing that that's where, you know, the majority of the world's population has just, you know, become the majority and living in cities, and it will increase. So one of your research interests and expertise is the urban. And so given that and having a street frontage, I think, you know, this here, having been speaking about your screen interest and expertise, is also introducing sort of another version of a courtyard, right?
Yeah, yeah, and this house actually, and this is something that often you see in Vietnamese urban row houses, is they'll have a very small entry courtyard, which this house also has. So that provides the first kind of buffer. But the challenge is to allow you know, people that want to connect to people out on the street to allow it to be opened up for kind of communication, but also to allow privacy when that is wanted. So some kind of variable openings are important for that. And of course, in Vietnam, if you're not air conditioning, and this house was designed for use without air conditioning, it needs to be able to open up. So the outer house, so to speak, the outer walls that you see in the red brick are porous, and they allow ventilation through, yet still some degree of privacy. And then the inner house allows further control over those facets.
Mm-hmm. And the next slide is actually perfectly portraying that, what you had just seen, and the sort of, which we always recommend to our emerging generations that we're coaching, we're privileged to coach. We say this kind of section perspective is really a great thing that shows both space and then also the anatomy of the nature of the beast that you create, which is this sort of onion nature here of a beast, right, with the different peels around each other. So you can see that well. And move on to the next slide is a great suggestive illustration that shows the porosity of that sort of peripheral wall, right? That, as I was saying, they're almost like little bonsai, multitude of little bonsai micro courtyards for, you know, habitat, natural habitat. Some nice insects might enjoy their little micro courtyards and all these little holes, which are actually flipped on the side, hollow bricks, Brian.
Right, right. Yeah, again, the outer wall is kind of seen as to be a kind of first sort of kind of tempering element for kind of sun and so forth, so that, and rain. And that allows the sort of inner house to be kind of have some level of protection. And you can see there's kind of a side courtyard, if you will, a kind of almost narrow sort of vegetated alleyway, if you will, that goes along the length of the house. So there is various ways in which kind of, again, light and air and greenery and so forth can be introduced into the interior of the house itself.
Yeah, and I think the kind of the spongy outer wall is really great, because if there's something that people might be afraid of in courtyards, is like feeling trapped, right? There's a wall and it cuts you off, while the porosity of this sort of Swiss cheesiness of that wall allows, as you said, the breeze to go through and light to penetrate through. And, you know, if you're really getting up close with your eye, you can even get a little circular glimpse of what's behind, right? So it's really, I think, a really great iteration of that theme. And so as we're operating on this sort of, you know, tough benchmark of, you know, little to no budget, and that's what you were shooting for, and you were even forcing yourself to, and be forced to be on a smaller budget, you kind of experience that courtyards to some degree, obviously in tropical climates less than in temperate climates where we originally come from, where you also need to enclose the courtyard with glass. So you're increasing your very expensive thermal envelope, right? And that's at least the way you're designing. In a bioclimatic way is not the case, but it's still eating into your budget. Let's be honest about that, right? So this project had to go through Americans have this dirty term of value engineering phase. And let's go to the next slide, and you sharing with us what's the outcome of that value engineering, which I believe you engineered value, actually.
Okay. Well, let's see. On the upper right, actually, is an interior view of a house that I designed in Portland, Oregon. So it does get a little bit colder there in the winter. And early schemes of this house actually did have a courtyard, but the clients then sort of prevailed, and they wanted to be able to use that more often during the full year. So it did become an atrium, but I tried to kind of still retain the feeling of the courtyard. That was a more expensive house. What we're seeing in the other images is a house that I designed, which is currently under construction, as you can see. And there's a small entry courtyard, like I talked about with the previous design, but had to eliminate the courtyard. And so here, I'm trying to get light from the a skylight over the stairway, which is in that narrow portion between the columns on the right-hand side. Ultimately, this will get infilled because it is a row house, and there will be houses ultimately that will get built on either side. So there needs to be opaque walls, and you can see them being infilled there with a material. I don't know if you want to talk about that, Martin.
We dwell upon that quite a bit, and that's AAC, autoclaved aerated concrete, and we will revisit that material. But on the bottom right, you can see that he used it in a way that's very familiar to me, that we will see in a minute, in its block system, where you basically, you know, use them like brick and pile them on the top of each other. But due to their nature of being aerated, they're very light, and easy to work with. You can easily even cut them with a wood saw, and you can see how they're doing that. And again, this project in itself is so interesting in again, engineering value. I want to reverse that dirty term so that I want to invite you to do a separate show about that. So please, the audience, you know, be excited about that one. And, you know, let's go back to our vision and our passion and bring up the next slide, because we were thinking, well, the most prominent and the most flamboyant courtyard house in our home in Hawaii is Doris Duke's house. And she, you know, having been the richest woman in the world at that point of time, could have built something like Mar-a-Lago, which I don't want to go there further. All I'm saying is people vote, please, to prevent more Mar-a-Lagos and everything around it. So here we're, you know, for being the richest woman in the world, she actually built a rather modest house and a rather modern house, and they're basically orchestrated around courtyards. And so that being said, obviously, you know, we're the proletarians. We've been thinking about how can we bring the Doris Duke kind of, you know, atmosphere of her house to as many people as possible in Hawaii and elsewhere in the tropics, right? And so the next slide is introducing a project that we both collaborated on, which is called the Volcrete Valley. And if we go to the next slide, you can see you, David, there in a show in Howard Wick's Code Green show, where we were more talking about the technology of it. And you want to recap that a little bit along that slide, David?
Oh, sure. Thank you. So, yeah, so we're looking at the traditional holly on the upper left and thinking about the way that the pili grass may give an appearance of kind of opacity, yet there is porosity sort of in that overall enclosure, if you will. And then kind of looking at the lower slide, we see the volcanic rock kind of put up against autoclave aerated concrete, which is on the right. And you can see they have a very similar kind of texture and kind of idea of porosity. But they both have similar characteristics, and they're fire resistant. They can bear some weight, and they aerated concrete, even better than volcanic rock, has a degree of insulation as well.
Yeah. So sort of in the sense of what DeSoto, and this is, you know, the model at the top left is in his Bishop Museum. So DeSoto, you know, being keen on the sort of the evolution of tradition of innovation. And he's talking, you know, post-contact innovation, because, you know, even if we would want to, we couldn't build the way anymore with sticks and latching and thatching, right? That doesn't cut it anymore. And certainly not for the demand of people, the housing people, right? We're talking 60, 70, up to 100,000 units, you know, homes we're short on. So that's what we're up for. And to that degree, as you said, you know, this material we thought would be, you know, having similar properties to, you know, what they used to use for certain reasons, to keeping the houses actually cool and protected from the elements. And now we're using another material that that is from these days, because as you always like to call wood construction termite food, right? This wouldn't work as food for the termites because it's cementatious of nature, so they're not munching on that stuff, right?
Right.
So let's go to the next slide, and you explain to us a little bit the specific product we're using here in this case. And the manufacturer is basically, they have a monopoly in the world, and they used to be called Yutong, and then they were bought by the Xella company. And you want to explain a little bit the nature of the specific product we were using, or we got interested in?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so the upper left image, this was when we went out, this was the contractor actually, and he was giving a demonstration. You see the blowtorch. So he's holding a fairly thin slab of the aerated concrete, and so he's holding his hand behind it and holding a blowtorch on the other side. So with most materials, that heat would transfer right through, and obviously he'd be burned. So he was showing the thermal insulation properties, but also the fact that it is fire resistive. So that was what was happening there. And sort of in the other image, we can see a stack of the precast planks. So they come to the site in a predetermined length and width, and then those can be quickly assembled on the site.
Yeah, and in front of the planks in the buckets here, you see that same piece he had torch also floating in water, which also shows how light it is, right? And how air infused it is, and that air inside, basically cement, makes it float.
Right.
So the next slide is, while again, the top right is my experience with a block system in that military diner we built. And down there is Gabor, is his name. Potsnak is doing his sort of case study house in Kailua, which he had done before he got to know us. So we were just basically came to the project and just seeing it and getting excited about it, but not having been involved. But as you said, we got excited in sort of its nature of that beast. And let's go to the next slide and your axons and explain a little bit our very material and product-based strategy, David.
Okay. Yeah, so we were, Martin and I were interested in seeing if we could propose some solutions for more affordable housing, single-family housing in Hawaii and Honolulu specifically. And so we were looking at this precast system and thinking how we could make houses which gave light and privacy and appropriate spaces, but to fit them on smaller lots, again, to save cost. So we thought we would take a typical smallest lot in Honolulu, the 50 by 100, and actually divide that in half so that we would put a single family house on a 25 by 100 lot. So
Absolutely.
so the image is kind of showing taking the panels and their standard widths and using them for sort of columns, walls, and also the roof. And it shows the kind of sequence of how that construction would work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, getting to the next slide, we're seeing what you explained. The lots are 25 feet wide, which is half of the generic 50 by 100 DHHL and most everyone else's lot, right? And then doing single lot construction, row house, doing the math, 25 minus 18 gets us to 6 or 7 feet of that linear courtyard that you explained before that you had incorporated into the original Vietnam cabana. And that gives access of daylight and the elements and greenery to every room in the house. And so the next slide is us recognizing that one size doesn't fit all. And we started to develop this sort of family of different iterations. And as it is in family, you got tall guys and short guys and fat guys and skinny guys, and you got them all, and depending on how much money you have and how much space demand you have, you can pick the one you kind of want. So there's this great variety within this sort of standardization that you need to be very cost efficient and effective, right? And with a green color coding, you can see that also you get very different kinds of courtyards, and of various, some have just the side courtyard and some have just the interior courtyards, and others have a combination of the two. So we thought that would be a great enrichment for the project. That then on the next slide, you want to talk a little bit about the siding here, the suggestive siding of it.
Okay, so we were actually looking for a side, and so we thought, well, this is one possibility. This one happens to be kind of further out west. Actually, this one happens to be near Pearl Harbor, and sort of being kind of dry and just that kind of more sort of arid situation around it. That's what the kind of oasis image on the upper left is about. And with the idea then of within that of putting a number of these row houses into a kind of a community, which could be infused with a lot of greenery, but also because there is this greater density, it does allow these other kind of larger courtyards, if you will, or kind of plazas to be interspersed, or gardens, if you will, interspersed within the overall complex, and a kind of park down at the very end, which would allow for various activities near the near the water as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and since we're getting to the end of the show, if we can get the last slide here up. Again, it was a lot of fun to work on that together, David. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah,
retrospectively and hopefully prospectively for the future, because if anyone is out there who likes it as much as we obviously do as the creators, you know, grab it, go from there, run with it, and we're gonna run with you. And so hopefully this picture here gets across this sort of inside out methodology of tracing back to Doris Duke's giving everyone a slice of paradise, giving everyone a Shangri-La slice of paradise, you know, being very tight and dense on a block, so very efficient and effective, yet getting all the benefits of the beauty of our so unique places in the tropics, right? So again, was lots of fun. Thank you, David, and thanks for having been on the show.
Thank you very much, Martin. It was great. Yeah.
Having taken us to you know, all your homes, and originally, you know, in Oregon, and the great sort of encapsulated Courtyard house there, and then having taken us to your other paradise in Vietnam, both the speculative and basically build under construction project that we want to revisit, and then also taking us home to Hawaii, because after all, this is the ThinkTech Hawaii show, and we want to sort of think about what can we learn from other areas. I'm broadcasting live actually from Karl Heinz's Courtyard here in Würzburg, who is our landlord currently, and he owns a 400-year-old house and has a courtyard that's grouped around a central courtyard. So I'm sort of broadcasting from a courtyard scenario as well. But obviously, as you noticed, I'm bundled up, so it's getting cold, so we can't make less use of the courtyard, which again, we want to remind us and the audience of, we can and should do more back in Hawaii, right?
Yeah, well, great. And really appreciate you having me on and being able to share some of the work that I did and the work that we've done together. So very good.
Always a pleasure. And as we said, won't be the last time. You're on already with the next project. So all the best for completing your Vietnam Courtyard Cabana of an engineered in a engineered value way. So looking forward to that. And until then, David, see you around and stay healthy and safe and sound, and easy breezy and easy breathy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you too, Martin.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye, David.